The desert was quiet in the way it only ever was at dawn, when the wind carried old stories across the plains and the sun crept slowly over the distant mesas. And Elijah Crow, a lonely rancher who had lived more years with cattle than with people, rode his horse along the fence line he had repaired 100 times before, not because it needed fixing, but because routine was the only thing that kept his memories from rising. And it was on this ordinary ride that something entirely extraordinary stopped him cold, for there beneath an old cottonwood tree stood a sight that did not belong to the morning at all. A young Apache girl bound high enough that her feet barely touched the ground, a rough wooden sign hanging against her chest with words scratched deep into it that read, "White man don't forgive." And in that moment Elijah did not think of history, or blame, or fear. He thought only of a child abandoned to cruelty, and he acted without hesitation, cutting her free with shaking hands, lowering her gently to the earth as though the land itself were watching to see what kind of man he would be. And when she collapsed against him, weak but breathing, Elijah felt a weight settle on his chest that he had not felt since the war took his brother years before, a realization that some wounds were older than any fence line and deeper than any grave. And as he wrapped her in his coat and carried her toward his ranch, the sign remained burned into his mind, not as an accusation but as a challenge, because he knew that forgiveness was not a thing spoken once and forgotten. It was something proven through action, through choice, through sacrifice. And as the girl stirred and opened her eyes filled with fear and disbelief, Elijah spoke softly, not in apology, not in defense, but with simple truth, telling her she was safe now, that the desert would not claim her today. And as the sun rose fully, painting the sky gold and red, Elijah felt the past breathing behind him, the long history of blood and broken promises between men like him and people like her. Yet he rode on, knowing that turning back would be easier, but staying the course would mean everything. And when they reached his ranch, a place long silent except for the creak of wood and the low sounds of animals, Elijah laid her near the fire, gave her water, and waited, because waiting was sometimes the only way to show respect. And as the day passed, the girl watched him with guarded eyes, seeing not a monster or a savior, but a man who chose not to walk away. And when night came, Elijah sat by the door with his rifle untouched beside him, not guarding against her but guarding her, understanding that if anyone came looking, they would have to face the truth of what kind of man he had decided to be that morning. And if this story has reached you so far, remember that every great change in history begins with a single moment where someone chooses compassion over fear. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be told, stories that remind us humanity still exists even in the harshest places, then stay with this channel, because what happens next will test not only Elijah's courage, but the meaning of forgiveness itself. The days that followed were not easy, because healing never happens all at once, and trust never arrives simply because someone wishes it to. And the young Apache girl, whose name Elijah learned was Nia, spoke little at first, communicating more through silence than words. Yet Elijah understood that silence often carried more truth than speech, and he let it be, offering food, warmth, and distance when needed. While outside the ranch, rumors began to move like dust storms, whispers of a white rancher sheltering an Apache child, whispers that stirred anger in some and curiosity in others. And when a group of men eventually rode up, not with guns raised, but with questions sharp enough to cut, Elijah stood firm, explaining nothing more than that a child had been harmed, and he would not allow harm again. And though the men left unsettled, something had shifted, because standing for what was right had a way of spreading quietly. And within the ranch walls, Nia began to observe Elijah's routines, how he spoke gently to animals, how he repaired broken things instead of throwing them away, how he listened more than he talked. And one evening, as the fire crackled low, she finally asked him why he had saved her, not accusingly but honestly. And Elijah answered without grand speeches, telling her that when he looked at her he saw someone's daughter, someone's future, and that leaving her would have meant losing what little humanity he had left. And in that moment Nia did not forgive history or forget pain, but she saw something new, the possibility that a single person could choose differently even when the world expected cruelty. And word of her survival eventually reached her people, bringing elders to the ranch not with weapons, but with caution. And Elijah welcomed them openly, allowing Nia to choose her path freely, because forgiveness could never be forced. And when she chose to return with her people, it was not because she feared Elijah, but because healing sometimes required going home. And before she left, the elders removed the sign from the tree where it had once hung, not to erase the past, but to prevent it from defining the future. And Nia turned back one last time, meeting Elijah's eyes with gratitude that needed no words. And as the dust settled and the ranch grew quiet again, Elijah returned to his routines. But he was no longer the same man who rode fences to escape memory. He was a man who had faced it and chosen kindness. And if you've listened to this story and felt even a small reminder that one choice can change a life, then this channel exists for you. Because stories like these are not about the past alone. They are mirrors held up to the present, asking who we decide to be when no one is watching. And if you want more powerful stories that remind us compassion still matters, don't forget to subscribe, because every subscription helps keep these stories alive. And sometimes the greatest forgiveness is not spoken aloud, but proven quietly through the courage to act when the world expects silence. Time moved differently after Nia returned to her people, not faster or slower but heavier, as if every sunrise now carried the weight of what had been proven possible. And Elijah Crow felt that weight each morning when he rode past the cottonwood tree, the place where silence had once screamed louder than gunfire. And though the sign was gone, its memory lingered, not as anger but as responsibility, because Elijah understood now that doing the right thing once did not excuse a lifetime of looking away. And as weeks passed, he noticed changes beyond his ranch, small at first. A trader who greeted him instead of spitting near his boots, a neighbor who asked questions instead of making accusations. And then one afternoon, a young boy arrived on horseback with a simple message from the Apache elders, an invitation not of thanks, but of dialogue. And Elijah hesitated, knowing that stepping into their land meant reopening wounds history preferred to keep buried. Yet he went anyway, not as a savior or hero, but as a man willing to listen. And when he sat among the elders, he spoke little, answering questions honestly, admitting ignorance freely. And it was there that he learned the truth behind the sign, that it was not meant for him alone but for the world, a warning carved from generations of broken promises. And Elijah did not argue or defend those who came before him, because some truths could not be softened. And when he left, he carried no praise, only understanding, which proved heavier and more valuable than approval. And back at the ranch, Elijah began opening his land as neutral ground, allowing injured travelers rest regardless of where they came from, feeding those who arrived hungry without asking their names. And slowly the ranch transformed from a place of isolation into a quiet crossing point where suspicion gave way to shared humanity, and rumors spread again. But this time they carried a different tone, stories of a man who chose fairness when fear was easier. And though not everyone approved, change rarely arrives with applause. And Elijah accepted that being disliked was a small price to pay for doing what felt right. And if you're listening to this story right now, know that real courage is rarely loud. It doesn't announce itself. It simply shows up again and again, even when no one is watching. And if you believe stories like this matter, stories that remind us how one choice can ripple outward, then staying subscribed to this channel means you're choosing to keep these lessons alive for others who need them. The true test came when danger returned not as open violence, but as pressure, subtle and relentless, when a group of powerful men demanded Elijah choose a side, insisting neutrality was weakness. And Elijah realized then that kindness often engages those who profit from division. Yet he stood firm, refusing to let his land or his conscience be claimed by hatred. And when tensions rose between settlers and the Apache once more, Elijah found himself walking a fragile line, carrying messages, calming fears, reminding both sides of the cost of bloodshed. And though mistakes were made and trust wavered, the absence of immediate conflict became its own quiet victory. And one evening, as Elijah watched the sunset from his porch, older now not in years but in wisdom, he saw a familiar figure approach. Nia, no longer the frightened girl he'd found beneath the tree, but a young woman shaped by strength and clarity. And she did not come to stay or to reopen wounds. She came to tell him that the story of the rancher who chose mercy had traveled far, becoming a lesson shared among her people, not as a tale of rescue but of choice. And Elijah listened with humility, knowing that the moment he'd acted without hesitation had grown beyond him, becoming something larger. And when she left again, there was no sadness, only peace, because some connections are not meant to bind, they are meant to guide. And Elijah returned to his routine one last time, riding fences not to escape memory but to honor it, understanding now that forgiveness is not forgetting and justice is not revenge, but balance earned slowly through consistent action. And as the desert settled into quiet once more, Elijah knew his life would never be famous or celebrated, yet it would matter. And if this story has stayed with you until now, then you already understand why it's being told. Because the world is shaped not by grand speeches but by ordinary people choosing compassion when no one demands it. And if you want more stories that challenge the idea that hate is inevitable, subscribe to this channel, because every story shared is another reminder that humanity is a choice we make every day.